Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I hope you enjoy the interview. So Bishop Grandison, thank you so much for coming onto the platform. You are the administrative bishop of the New Testament Church of God, one of the most influential Black Pentecostal churches in the UK. It has around 10,950 members, and its reach has been known throughout the UK. It's been covered by the Telegraph. Ed Millband, Labour MP Ed Millband has talked about its influence several local MPs in the UK, and it's even been covered by platforms such as the Black Cultural Archives and the Black History Month UK, which have talked about the influence of the New Testament Church of God. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And from my views of your page, I can see that you've interviewed some very outstanding personalities. And I'm just pleased that you chose to interview myself, and I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about your early life in Kensal Green, experiences growing up and working in commercial banking.
Oh, wow. So it's been such a while. Kensal Green, 1966, very good year for England when we won the World Cup. But growing up in Kensal Green, Kensal Green, I was there up until age 8. Went to a school called Princess Frederica. I think the school is still there. Are you familiar with the school? But that's the school I went to. I remember I lived on Purves Road, and at the time it seemed like this amazingly huge road. We used to do races on the pavement, play football, hopscotch, races, the whole works. And I remember traveling back there as an adult, and it was this tiny place. As I sort of thought to myself, where did we get the space to do all that? But very fond memories. Had lived beside some amazing people who we're still in contact today. And yeah, amazing times. And then we moved in 1974. We moved back to Jamaica with my parents. And again, that was exciting times. I remember 2 things about growing up in Jamaica: wanting to be able to speak the lingo. I tried desperately to get rid of the British accent, which I obviously did, and now can't get it back. And also wanted to walk barefooted, because all the other kids didn't wear shoes, and I desperately wanted to walk on the hard stones like the other kids. And eventually I managed to do that, but it was good. You also mentioned about just my life growing up in Jamaica. I went to Calabar High School, best high school in the entire country, probably the world. And yeah, it was great growing up there, and then leaving school, went into banking, worked for National Commercial Bank for a number of years until I decided to leave and to come back to the UK to live. So that's kind of my UK Jamaica early years in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. And on Princess Frederica, that's where my parents went.
Your parents went to Princess Frederica?
Yeah. Both my mum,
wow.
and my father.
Wow. Well, I went there in, was it 19? So I left in 1974, and I think I was in grade 2 at the time, or year 2. So that was how long. And well, you can ask your dad about Mr. Bodgerby. He was the principal at the time. Very horrible man. God rest his soul.
Thank you so much.
Great.
And you are married to your wife, Sonia, and you have 2 children that are both Christians. What advice would you give to young people that have a strong desire to be married?
Wait. You know, that's don't rush. I know for women it's probably different than to men, but I would advise anyone who's going into marriage, wait. When you think about the person you're going to marry, apart from the hips, lips, and fingertips, you need to think about who is it that you'd want to stand beside you when you are burying a loved one. I remember when I buried my father back in 2019, the person beside me holding my hand was my dear wife. But also think about who you want to sit beside you in the doctor's office when you get the worst report of your life. You know, but yeah, but I also say marry someone who can be your biggest support and your biggest critic at the same time. You need balance in your life, and someone who amuses you, someone who makes you laugh. And that for me is very, very important. So that's kind of the advice I'd give to anyone wanting to get married. And we could go on, but I'll just end it there.
Thank you so much. And what factors impacted your decision to leave the banking world to go into Christian ministry?
Wow, that's the huge. So I've always felt this prompting in my spirit that there was something more, and sort of I worked for Barclays Bank. I came here and started to work for Barclays Bank, and doing quite well. At one point, I was managing a branch, and I remember there was a customer that came in, and he's a white gentleman from South Africa, and he came in to make a complaint about some transactions on his account, and he was quite annoyed. Looked on his statement, and I saw Vineyard Ministries, so I realized he was a Christian, and the conversation changed when he realized that I was also a Christian, and we became good friends. And then he shared with me that he had left full-time work to go into the prophetic ministry. And I remember once he came in and he had tears in his eyes, and he said to me, he told me this parable about the man who went into a field and found a pearl of great price, sold everything he had to buy that pearl. And he said to me, the Lord wants you to go into full-time ministry. And under my breath, I was chuckling and said, you're having a laugh. There's no way. I thought about all the bills and things I needed to do and things I needed to achieve. And, you know, going into ministry, no one pays you. Within a year, I was on my way to the British Virgin Islands to become a full-time youth pastor. And I mean, there's so many things that just lined up within that prophecy. And I remember saying to the guys in the bank when I was leaving, they had a leaving do for me. So I said I was going into pastoring. So this woman thought I was going into plastering. She was saying, why are you leaving the bank to go be a plasterer? So I was saying, no, not plastering, pastoring. But that was, but it was really a life-changing moment, because it was leaving. We sold everything. We sold all our furniture, gave away my car, rented out our house, and we moved to 4,000 miles away in the British Virgin Islands to become youth pastors and assistant pastor. And yeah, the rest, they say, is history.
That's really powerful what you've just said there, because I know that there's been lots of newspaper articles that have said that there's lots of young ministers that leave ministry early because they might struggle financially or struggle. So what would your advice be to them? Because just what you said there was so powerful.
Well, we did struggle. That's the thing. I remember coming back to the UK after, so we went to Tortola and we did what we had to do. And obviously there were challenges, and we decided that it was time to come back to the UK. But when I came back, I remember speaking at a men's conference up in Stoke-on-Trent, and I was sharing with the men. It was a men's conference, it was pure, only men, no women there. And I remember sharing with them how God had took me from full-time work into full-time ministry. And that was a decision I'd made, and, you know, encourage men who felt the call not to be afraid. And then when it got difficult, I decided to go back to work for Barclays part-time. And I remember doing the interview on the phone, passed it flying colors. And then I got to the face-to-face interview, and I just became discombobulated. I forgot. I didn't have money to come out of the car park. I forgot my license. I forgot everything. And then I couldn't continue with the interview. And I was saying to the young man, you know, I used to work for the bank. You've got all my mortgage details. I mean, can you take my proof of address from that? And he said, no, you need to bring those things in, I'm afraid. And I said to him, I said, you know what? It's a sign. It's not to be. He said, no, don't be silly. No, you can come back. I said, no, it's okay. I know what I'm talking about. And God he blocked me from going back into part-time work. And he said to me, never you go back on a decision that you've made publicly to those around, because you make me and yourself look like a fool. So for the next how many years, I went into full-time ministry in a church that couldn't pay me. And with a young one our second child came shortly after. And yeah, we did struggle. We did struggle. And I remember starting off on a stipend of £700 a month. And that was with 2 children and a wife who was on maternity leave. But God saw us through, and now I'm leading the organization. It just shows that God will look after those who are faithful to him, you know. And one of the things, David said, I was young and now I'm old. I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor seed begging for bread. And I didn't have to beg for bread. People brought bread. People, you know, the Holy Spirit moved on individuals and said, listen, we felt, you know, that we wanted to bless you. I had one deaconess who backed up her car after prayer meeting one night and just unloaded bags and bags of shopping into my car. And it was that we just saw the provision. It was a time of manna during those times. And I look back on those days, not with shame or regret, but with gratitude, because I could see that God was preparing us for something else.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. And I think that you've talked about some of the challenges that you've gone through to get where you are today. But I just wanted to ask, is there any more challenges that you went through on your way to the top of, you know, Christian ministry? Were there any other challenges that maybe can encourage others that might also be going through similar challenges as well?
Challenges. What I think the word ministry, there must be a Greek to it that says challenge, because it's you know, I'm making things up here now, but it's been one challenge after the next. But I think what happens is there have always been opportunities in which we see the hand of God. I think one of the great challenges was the health of my wife. Twice I almost lost her through sickness. The first one was a disease called sarcoidosis. Just after she had our first child, doctors gave her up, and literally overnight, the miraculous happened. She went from being 100% dependent on oxygen, unable to breathe, and to the next morning when I went to visit Lewisham Hospital, she was on the side of a bed singing, "I know my Redeemer liveth," you know, and that for me was it's a 24-hour miracle. But we prayed, and people all over the world were praying. And then in 2017, just as I was finishing up my degree at Spurgeon's, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Just came out of the blue, and again we saw the hand of God, and people were praying. And today, you know, she's cancer-free and just the most precious person in my life. Challenges, they've come in forms of sickness, but also in terms of, you know, sometimes the places that we have to serve. Not everyone will catch on to the vision that you set, and there will be challenges in terms of people being at odds with what you feel is the will of God. But eventually, some of the very challenging people become your greatest champions. And that's been the great thing of ministry, to see people go from opposing to, you know, being your greatest champions. You know, so that's been our situation. Yeah.
So much. And the New Testament Church of God is a massive church. It's got 10,000 950 members, and it's over 130 locations throughout the UK. For those people in my audience that might not know much about the New Testament Church of God, could you just tell us a bit about the church and its significance today?
Right. Well, the New Testament Church of God is as you say, it's an amazing church. It started. I say, my thing is, we had an Acts 8 moment where our forefathers came to this country, some as Methodists and Anglicans and Baptists, and some of them Pentecostals, looking for a place of worship. Whenever people of color or Caribbean people travel to a region, and that's the same today, they look for somewhere to worship. And as you know, we've heard the stories about even when people look for places to live, they were told no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. The church is no different, unfortunately. The church was not as welcoming as they should have been or could have been. And a lot of our folks, this is back in about 1953, around about that time, a lot of our people decided that that was it. You know, they'd given up in church, and some had gone back to living just not, I think when you don't go to church and you start to have all kinds of influences, you turn from the faith. And it was Dr. Oliver Lysesight who came and was part of a Methodist circuit and preaching, and all of a sudden the folks switched on him. And so what he did was he reimagined what church would be like, other than mainstream church. And he decided to start the New Testament Church of God, which was a stream of what was in Jamaica already. And him and a few other men and women came together in homes and started to have meetings, and that grew into the YMCA in up in Midlands, and it became branches in Birmingham and up and down the country. And what we have today is the New Testament Church of God. It was significant in the fact that I believe it revived the spiritual temperature in the United Kingdom. The church had flatlined in England, and I say that without no apology. There were only a handful of, older people going to church. It was not something that people relished. And I feel that the Pentecostal church, and in the New Testament Church of God in particular, brought a whole new brand of worship and church that revolutionized the country. And and as our children became older and had this vibrant kind of worship in our youth conventions, it literally paved the way for so many of the churches, the RCC, the RCCGs and the different expressions of churches to come in and to be part of what was a move of God. And so the New Testament Church of God and Oliver Lysesight birthed a whole new revival. And there were other churches that existed. There was Kojic and Church of God and Prophecy and others. And we're all kind of turning 70 around about this year and next year. But 70 years ago, there was this new move of the Holy Spirit. I think it was one of those revivals that's not probably spoken of, but the church grew rapidly. I tell you what happened is wherever people went to find work, they started a church. So I remember my own father-in-law, he was in Wolverhampton and Bilston, that side, and it was hard to find work. And he spoke to a friend who was living in Aldershot, and they was saying, there's work in Aldershot. It was an army town, and they picked up his family by faith and probably a handful of others. And as a result, he started the church in Aldershot. And that's what happened up and down the country. Every time someone found work, they started a church. So amazing stories.
Following the post-war invitation from the government, Caribbean families began to settle in Britain. Many, including the Lysesight family who arrived in 1951, found some of the white British congregations were less than welcoming.
We discovered some were saying that they have been to other places and they're not welcome. Nevertheless, this did not allow us to have any animosity against the folks. So there was no place in me to have any hatred, because the Lord was leading us through all these situations.
Rose's husband, Oliver, took matters into his own hands, and in Wolverhampton he founded the UK branch of the American New Testament Church of God, inviting newly arrived families to join.
He did the preaching and I did the singing. Between 1953 to 1956, the church grew. I mean, grew immensely.
The congregation Oliver founded over 60 years ago is still thriving today and is known as Harvest Temple. It's one of a network of 130 churches across the country with over 30,000 members.
How do you feel now about the fact that the denomination is all over the country?
When I look back and see now the expansion, the growth of this organization, I am really amazed, and this allows me to know how great God is.
When Oliver died in 2006, the funeral attracted huge crowds eager to celebrate the life of a man who had brought a new Christian denomination to the UK.
When we arrived there, I just realized how important my husband was. It was so beautifully done.
What do you think Oliver would think about the growth and the development of the church?
Oh, he would fall off his chair. We are blessed. And honestly speaking, I am enjoying it to the fullness of my life. And I give God all the praise and all the glory.
Thank you for that, because what you said about the revival is backed up by history. So when the
Yes.
Windrush generation came over, the church was starting to decline, and they brought in what we know as Pentecostalism. And Dr. Oliver Lysesight is actually listed as one of the 100 great Black Britons, which is the most influential Black Britons around. It was done by a poll of thousands of people, and he was named on a list with the likes of Lewis Hamilton and Craig David, and he was actually second on that poll. So thank you so much for saying that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that, because that is actually true. So thank you so much for sharing that.
And another thing I like about UT is the way how you preach the gospel is straight to the point, using the gospel. And it also ties in with an article from a Telegraph, which was following the Queen's funeral. Many Britons believed they wanted traditional Christianity back.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to churches that want to attract new members without watering down the gospel?
Well, I saw the article that you referred to, but it required a subscription, and I wasn't able to access the article. But I kind of get the gist of what it is that you were suggesting. And I think in terms of our vision going forward is a relevant relational church, reimagining God at work in the community and the nation. And what the world, the nation, the communities around us are looking for is a church that is relevant, one that is not steeped in tradition and rhetoric, but one that understands what is happening, or a church that connects with the current climate within the communities or the nation, and reacts or responds in a way that is in line with their understanding of what's happening. And a church that is relational, a church that sees itself as part and parcel the communities in which they are engaged in. So it's handing a parcel of food, but also sitting alongside them and having the meal with them, is that being relational. I remember, so we run a food bank in West Croydon. I'm still the pastor for West Croydon Church. And when I went there in 2021, one of the things I said to the guys around me, I said, we need to start a feeding program, because the borough, Croydon Borough, is broken. The first people who are going to be impacted are the poor and the vulnerable. And today we're feeding nearly 300 people every Saturday. But what happens is, when you meet people, not everyone is homeless. There are people who have a full-time job, but have a disabled husband at home. And so it's just one income that's coming in. And they've had to supplement that by coming alongside, coming in and accessing food banks. And so in being relational, you're hearing stories, real life stories of people who don't show up because they're trying to scrounge. They're there because of issues that have affected them. And so as a result of that, you said that we preach and we get straight to the point, but we're not here about spiritual dynamics and gymnastics and trying to use every Greek and Hebrew word that we've learned at seminary. Was trying to say to people prophetically that this will not last. You know, one of my younger pastors preached a sermon just recently after a while on Sunday, and basically she was preaching about Jeremiah 29 and what happened with the children who were in exile, and the hope that she was bringing through that sermon was speaking to the situation that whatever you're going through, do not dwindle. What was happening in Jeremiah's time within Babylon was, even though people were faced with difficult situations, you must not dwindle. You must not die out. You must not become depleted in number, but you must continue to grow. And I think as a church, one of the things that we must do is we must, in our relevance, we must continue to reshape ourselves. A preacher I know spoke about dinosaurs and the church, and he was saying the animals or the dinosaurs that adapted to change made it into the post-historic age, and the ones that didn't, you can see them in the British Museum. And the churches that refuse to change and adapt to change and what's happening become relics. So we have to be careful that the movement does not become a monument, something that just something we celebrate, but it has no relevance to society. And as you sit with people, ordinary people in communities, you will see that they aren't against the church. They just need to see a church that is in touch with what's happening in the communities around them. I think that's a very long-winded answer, but I'm a Pentecostal preacher, so forgive me.
Isn't this brilliant? I wouldn't change a thing about it.
Okay, awesome stuff.
So I'd also like to talk about a big issue that's affecting us, whether it be a social issue or a political issue, or even a moral issue, which is the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
You know, we've all heard about the horror stories of families having to sell their wedding rings and their engagement rings and everything to try and, get around the cost of living. But what I wanted to ask you is, what will NTCG be doing to support the most vulnerable families during the season?
So I can only speak of what's been happening in my local church, and what we hope to do going forward. And it's still in our early stages. When I was right at the beginning of the COVID, the pandemic, in my former church, which is in Woolwich, we started what we call the COVID Fund, and we made it available to anyone who was experiencing difficulties during the COVID the pandemic. And obviously it has to be means tested. So we had people, nothing to do with myself, a separate panel of people who would observe speak to individuals who were going through a difficult period. And it was in such a way that no one would be embarrassed. And it was a blessing to so many people, real blessing. A lot of people lost their loved ones and were caught off guard and weren't able to bury loved ones. And the fund was there to help people during those times and other difficulties. And so what's happened recently is, because COVID's over and we are now in this cost of living crisis, the fund, the name of the fund has been converted to the cost of living fund. And so what is now the situation is that what we do now is we have made it open to all of our memberships, that if there is a difficulty, if you're going through difficulty, then you can access this fund. We've also started a uniform project, which will give £50 per child in a family to help with uniforms. And when we had our community barbecue in the summer, a young lady I've never met in my entire life came up with her 2 kids and said, "I just want to thank you." I said, "What's," then she started to say that it helped a great deal, that she was able to get uniforms for her children. And I said, "Well, it's not to do with me, it's the team." But she said, "No, I heard that you were behind it." And so these are some of the things that we have started, and these are things that we will continue to do in terms of benevolence. But we will be lobbying Parliament and the leadership. We just want to make sure that this Prime Minister is going to be the Prime Minister. We've had 3 so far this year, so we just want to make sure that they've made up their mind that this is going to be the Prime Minister. And then we will be lobbying Parliament to say this is the real plight of individuals. And whereas you're giving tax breaks to the extremely rich and whoever, we need to spare a thought for those who are struggling, those at the very bottom of society, if you can put it that way. So rather than just giving out meals, we still want to make sure that we are advocating on behalf of those who are the least able and the most vulnerable. How that's going to be done, it's still something in progress. I'm not a politician, but the people around me who are in very prominent places who will help us to do so. So that's the aspiration.
Master's business requires haste. But today I just want to focus on what God is doing in this room, and especially for those of you who are watching by social media. I want to bring your attention to what God is doing in this season. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 30, on the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are in conversation. Moses, the law, Elijah, the prophets, speaking to Jesus, a season of grace. And the old is endorsing the new, and the new is acknowledging the legacy of the old. But there is a conversation that is going on. Is anyone hearing me today? There is a conversation, because there is no transition without conversation. The vision, we are NTCG, is unapologetically patriotic or patriotic to a house that gave refuge to the refused. I make no apologies for stating that we are NTCG, because if we weren't NTCG, then we would have been nowhere today. And so, as this vision speaks boldly, it says to us as a church who have somehow lost their place as influencers in this nation, that there is a rallying cry to everyone in this house, both young and old. And if I can borrow the phrase of one of my favorite American presidents. Yes, we can. And if we, the NTCG, can, then failing schools in our communities can. It's good to see the head teacher for Paxton Primary School in Croydon here. Would you please stand, Teresa? I'm going to do it to you. Our church decided that we were going to partner with a school in the community, a failing school that is moving from failing to new things. You may be seated. And if we can, then single parents deciding between heating and eating can. Jamaicans are saying, heating, eating, is there no difference? Heating, there's a difference between heating and eating. H, okay. If we can, then Sir Mark Rowley and the police on our streets can do better. You know, while we are, I'm not here to preach wonderful sermons. This is put your seatbelts on. This is going to be a radical leadership. We're not going to sit by and watch things happen. If we can, then energy companies can put people before profits. Only if we can. If we can, then the new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, can put an end to this Windrush scandal.
Yeah, one thing I just want to say about the answer is that there's few answers that have moved me probably as much out of all the interviews that I've done. Like some of your responses have. Probably one of the only other interviews that probably had me or very moved was probably Carvin Winers and Tamala Mann when they gave their answers. I was just blown away. So yeah, I'm going to move on to the next question. But yeah, I was just thank you. I'd also like to talk about the revelation of the outrage surrounding Charles Q. So there were many churches from the Black faith community that talked about that. One thing I read about in your vision, which I found really encouraging, was how you wanted to work with different agencies to tackle injustice. So could you please just tell us a bit more about how you plan to do this work with bodies such as the Met, the NHS, and other bodies to tackle injustice, racism, and inequality in British society?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Child Q. When the news about Child Q hit the papers, I was at Scotland Yard at that very moment, taking photos with high-ranking members of the Met, and then it came out, and I was mad. I was furious because I felt that you tricked us. You know, you're taking photos with us, you know, leaders, clergy, and so forth, and here comes this revelation of a vulnerable child, and spoke to one of the other community leaders to say this is not on, and I don't want to be made a fool. And they got on to a guy called Alex Murray at the time. He was head of violent crime with Scotland Yard, and within days there was a meeting with him and high-ranking officials within Croydon and also in the Met, basically coming onto a Zoom and to explain what had happened. So they knew that the case was being dealt with, but had no idea that it was going to be something that was announced on that particular day. And I think the answers that we had were very. No one was hiding behind anything, and the commitment they gave to us was that if anything's kicking off, if there's any major incident happening in terms of crime and youth, especially to do with Black people, that we would within 24 hours be notified and there would be some kind of briefing. To date, it's happened. One of the first places that the new commissioner visited was Croydon. And the only reason why he didn't come when he said he would have come was because of Her Majesty's death at the time, and they had to rearrange things. And within weeks, he was in Croydon answering questions, speaking to grassroots charities and leaders of the faith. Now, so what happens in Croydon? And I think Croydon, and I have to mention people like Reverend Anthony King and others within Croydon who are amazing people. I serve alongside other clergy. One of them is Rosemary Mallet. She's the Bishop of Croydon, first Black woman, first woman Croydon Bishop in Croydon. And these are people we meet every Friday in Croydon Voluntary Action. It's a community space sponsored by Mayans, the charity. And you will have any number of charities from 20 to 30 charities, along with high-ranking superintendents, inspectors of the police, every Friday, responding to issues around crime, around stop and search. Recently introducing the gentleman who's replacing me at Croydon. We went to the training center in Bromley, and it's all of the new recruits who come to Croydon. There's a session with Anthony King and Donna Murray Turner, both Black people, one male, one female, as to how do you police the community. A lot of the guys who come into Croydon have come from leafy parts of Surrey and Kent, and where they don't see probably one or two Black people. And to police this community, you need to have some sort of engagement and understanding. And so these are some of the things that, these are some of the things that we in Croydon have pioneered, I think. And it's something that I'd like to see replicated, not just right around the country. So as lead for New Testament Church of God, my remit is to make sure that my key leaders in different regions of the country will be a part of conversations that happen with the police to make sure that policing is fair and it's not heavy-handed. And yes, put responsibility on us as parents to address situations that are happening within our own homes and our communities, but also to hold members of the police, hold them accountable for the way they police us. And yes, it's happening in many of our churches, but we want to make it something that is widespread. Again, a very long-winded answer, but that's kind of how. And coming to Croydon in the last 2 years, it's been a learning experience about how to engage with grassroots communities and also with the police.
Thank you so much for that. And one funny thing that I actually read is that one of the best-selling books during the pandemic was the Bible, and the reason for that is because people wanted to know if we were in a time of revelation during coronavirus. So it was the most read chapter of the Bible, and this was the reason why people were buying it. So the thing I'd like to ask is, how is NTCG going to build on Britain's curiosity of faith following a return to normality?
Right. Well, it's human beings are funny creatures. People during COVID, we were knocking pans for nurses, and we were kind to each other. And as soon as lockdown was over, people just went back to being themselves. Unfortunately, and I've not given up on society. I do believe that at the very core of us, we are good people. But it's as a church, I'm hoping that we can remind people that the Bible isn't just for COVID. That in other words, so I want to make sure that we continue to uphold the Bible as being God's standard and not preach something that is fanciful, popular, but continue to open up the pages of Scripture as being relevant, not just for a crisis, but for everyday living. How that's going to happen is going to be challenging, because unfortunately the church isn't necessarily on everyone's radar when everything's going well. I'm hoping that as pastors and leaders, we will still come alongside people with the word of God, and in doing so, remind people of God's faithfulness, to have taken us out of what was probably one of the most terrifying times. I mean, I remember many occasions going to bed, feeling very unwell and praying, Lord, help me to see tomorrow. And it's, I think we just need to have the Bible as God's standard of hope, and just keep sharing that message, what we've always been doing.
Thank you so much for that. And I just want to ask you, what does your Christian faith mean to you, like on a personal level?
Everything, Micah. My faith is absolutely everything to me. It's not one of those add-ons. It is at the very center of everything that I do. Every decision that I make in terms of life is around faith. Where I live, who I marry, it's all around faith. And my faith is what has allowed me to be the person I am today. It's not an education. It's not a career. My faith is what has positioned me. I mean, I grew up as a young person who struggled with probably, I think when you grow up not having a lot, you base your esteem on what you don't have. Yeah. And because I didn't have a lot, I didn't think I could achieve a lot. And it was faith that made me realize that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that they have. So it's not a life of quantity, but a life of quality. And so I went about living my best life, not based on my net worth, but upon my eternal worth. And that was the faith that I had. It helped me to realize things about me, to overcome the most adverse situations. So my faith is everything, absolutely everything. You take that away and then there's nothing left, really.
Thank you so much. And the last question I'd like to ask you is, please could you tell us about any projects or events or plans that the New Testament Church of God has for 2022-2023?
Okay, well, so the biggest event that's coming up is our 70th celebration. It's going to be next year in the summer. We're still working on dates because we need the right kind of venue to house this celebration. It's going to be a massive coming together of all of our departments and ministries to celebrate that 70th year, and that's something that we are very pleased about, proud about. Our slogan is "We are NTCG," and it's networking strategically, theologically sound leadership, community focused, and growing and resourcing healthy, vibrant churches. So that's NTCG. That's what it's about. And we are running road shows. We had one a few weeks ago in Birmingham, Handsworth. We had nearly 300 people, and it was such an exciting time because I saw the young and the old and the middle-aged, the disabled. Everybody came together, and we were celebrating kind of a lost legacy. And I'm not saying, and this is no indictment on previous administrations, I just think over time we forgot who we were or who we are. And there was this kind of resurgence of pride and excitement. So the road shows are taking place. We're going to Leeds on the 19th of November, and then we're going to the West Country, and we're going over to North and South London. We're going to finish up in Southeast London. But what we're doing is just taking the show on the road, just reminding people who we are. So there's not going to be a lot in terms of events and projects for this year. we are really focusing on getting people refocused on the vision itself. We're restructuring who we are in accountability. I'm going to have to make our ministers accountable in terms of the way we pastor churches. I might be seen as the horrible bishop for a little while, but I think in due course we will see the benefits of doing that. What else is? But we're reimagining. So the great thing right now is we're giving leaders and members the permission to kind of just tear up the script that you had before, and to start from scratch and say, in your patch in North London or North Cumbria, wherever, what could church look like? Yes, we want to stay with the word of God, and we don't want to mush up the church, as they say, and start to bring in all kinds of things. But we want to say, what would church look like if we did things differently? So we're in that reimagining process where people are, I call it blue sky thinking. I have times when I'm just sat down and just writing down ideas as these are some of the things I love. If I had all the money I needed, what would I want to do? And I think God, he gets us to start from that point of the most ridiculous to the most necessary, and then we start to work in that sense. And so the 70th is going to be it's going to be huge. There are people already who live overseas who are making plans to be with us for the 70th. We just hope that we can find somewhere large enough to accommodate everyone, and bringing back some of our old songwriters, our old choir members, choir leaders. A time of nostalgia, but also a time of looking towards the future. Different groups are making themselves ready for the 70th and beyond. So that's kind of what we have in store for 2023 and beyond.
Thank you so much for such an exceptional interview. I just felt that this was really relevant, and I was just blown away by the answers you've given. And I'm very confident that this will not just inspire members of NTCG, but particularly my secular audience that might not know much about the church. There's stuff that they'll be able to resonate with from this. So Thank you so much just for taking out the time to be on my platform. I really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure, Micah. And funny thing is, I have been following you over the years and looking at what you've been doing. And I really appreciate the audiences that you're able to reach as a young man. And when we come off air, I'm going to have to find out who your mom and dad were, because if they went to my school, there's a very strong chance that we know each other. But keep up the good work that you're doing. And this is all part of the kingdom. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and to share with you and everyone else.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Same here.